She stood barefoot on the auction block, dirt smudged across her cheeks and fire burning fiercely in her eyes. The town of Calico Ridge hadn't seen a child sold in months, until that spring. Floodwaters had ravaged the northern fields, destroying crops, and ruthless bandits had carved a path of terror along the freight lines. Desperation had driven folks to do things they never thought they'd consider. Farmers came seeking labor, widowers for help in the kitchen. But men like Everett Langston, they came only to watch, to shake their heads in silent disapproval, cursing how the world was slipping into chaos. Yet, when Everett's gaze fell upon that girl, he didn't curse. He didn't speak. He simply stared, as if trying to read her soul through the fire in her eyes. She was maybe 12, maybe younger. Her frame so thin it seemed built from splintered wood. Her tangled hair the color of burnt straw clinging to her face. Her dress hung on her like it belonged to someone else, a ghost of a girl who'd long since been forgotten. Her feet were streaked with dirt and dust, blackened from walking through the dirt and despair. Yet her hands clenched at her sides, trembling with a quiet fury. Her chin stayed steady, unshaken. Her eyes, however, burned with a hatred that seemed far too old for her face, as if she'd already seen too much. The auctioneer's impatience grew thick in the air. Strong girl, works hard, can milk, cook, clean, belongs to a mining family that never came back. He barked. Who'll start at $5? Silence. A cough from the back. A man spat into the dust. Still, the girl remained unmoving, her gaze fixed on the crowd like she despised every one of them. Then, the auctioneer's voice cut through the silence, sharp and commanding. $4 then. Hell, 3. Before they could respond, Everett Langston stepped forward, his voice cutting through the murmurs like a blade. I'll take her, he declared. Clear, unwavering, heads turned sharply. Even the girl blinked once, just once, like she was surprised someone had spoken. Everett didn't glance at anyone else. He moved to the front, calloused hand slipping into the inside pocket of his dusty duster, pulling out folded bills. No counting, no hesitation. The auctioneer nodded eagerly, eager to be done with it all. Name? He asked. Langston, Everett replied. Then she's yours, the auctioneer said with a nod. Take her then. And with that, the girl stepped down from the block, her movement slow but steady. No hesitation, no gratitude. She held nothing in her hands, no bundle, no keepsakes, nothing but her own silent defiance. What's your name? Everett asked softly. She looked up, her eyes sharp and older than her years, carrying a weight that didn't belong to a girl her age. Juny, she said. That was short for something, but she shrugged. Not anymore. He nodded once, a quiet acknowledgement. Come on then. He didn't reach out a hand, and she didn't expect him to. They walked side by side through the town square, the crowd parting around them like dust and wind, torn between curiosity and indifference. She kept her eyes fixed on the woman, her gaze lingering on the house as if memorizing every shadow and detail. Yet she said nothing as Hester led her to a cramped side room near the kitchen. Inside, a battered straw mattress lay on the rough wooden floor, with a single wool blanket folded neatly atop it. Nothing more, nothing less. It was a stark, humble place, but Hester muttered under her breath, It's not much. Juny looked around, her eyes steady. It's more than I had yesterday. The dawn broke early that morning, and before the first rooster's crow, Juny was already awake. She moved with a quiet, practiced rhythm. chopping kindling with hands that knew the work, hands that didn't flinch even as her fingers bled. She didn't complain when her stomach growled for bread, nor did she ask for more. She just worked, silent as smoke curling from the chimney, her eyes sharp and watchful, as if she was listening for something unseen. Hester watched her from the window, her face clouded with concern. "She's been through something," she murmured. Everett, busy scrubbing his boots nearby, didn't answer. Eli, a pale, solemn boy of 15, observed her in silence, since the day his parents' wagon was torn apart on that stormy night, the night he was taken in by the Langston family. But Juny didn't treat him like he was broken. She handed him firewood without hesitation. She nodded when he gestured, never questioning his silence. And for the first time in 2 long years, Eli's lips twitched into a faint smile, a flicker of something softer beneath his hardened expression. A week slipped by, then another, and Juny's words remained scarce. Yet her hands never stopped moving, fixing a stubborn hinge on the barn without a single word of instruction, teaching herself to ride Everett's old mule with a patience that spoke of quiet resilience. She carried 2 milk pails on her hips, each one steady and spilling nothing, as if she'd been born to this life of toil. But Everett noticed something else, something darker. Every night after supper, instead of retreating to her room, she sat outside on the porch step, eyes fixed on the darkening horizon. Not out of fear, not restless, just watching. One evening, Everett finally broke the silence. "What are you looking for out there?" he asked softly. Juny didn't turn her head. "I listen," she replied simply, "for things coming." Everett's brow furrowed. "What kind of things?" Juny finally looked at him, her gaze steady. "The kind that took my family," she said quietly. Her voice carried no sorrow, only a quiet warning. Everett hesitated, sensing the weight behind her words. But he didn't press. Then came the first sign, an ominous ripple in the calm. It was late afternoon, the sun sinking behind the hills, casting long shadows over the fields when Juny looked up from washing a shirt, her hands wringing out the damp fabric. Her eyes froze, catching a flicker at the edge of the northern ridge, just a hint of movement. A lone rider on horseback, slow and watchful, not rushing but alert. She didn't speak at first, just narrowed her eyes and counted. 1 minute, then 2. The rider turned, disappeared into the thick trees ahead. Everett never took her lightly, not in his years on the frontier. But he knew better than to jump at shadows in the dead of night. Still, after the dishes had been washed and Hester had finally fallen into her dreams, he climbed onto the creaking porch, reached for the old shotgun resting on the mantel, and laid it across the kitchen table like a silent warning. Juny stood beside him, arms crossed, eyes sharp as a hawk's, silent as the wind through the pines. Everett meticulously cleaned the weapon, oiling its barrel, checking the shells with care, as if preparing for a storm yet to come. Come dawn, he rode out to town, seeking out Sheriff Marcus Dunn in his crooked office. "Seen anyone riding north of my land?" Everett asked, voice low but steady. The sheriff, a man as broad as a barrel of whiskey, with eyebrows like a pair of angry birds, rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "Can't say I have," he replied. "But they say Darrow's gangs are back in the hills. Hit a cattle drive west of here last week." Everett's brow darkened. "You think they'd come this far east?" The sheriff hesitated, then muttered, "Depends." "Got anything worth stealing?" Marcus asked, eyeing Everett. The rancher didn't answer. Instead, he turned his horse back toward home, riding faster than he had come. That evening, Juny set to work, laying small, clever traps. Strings stretched between fence posts, iron pans hidden beneath brush to clang if stepped on. Hester scoffed from the porch. "You setting snares for ghosts now?" Juny simply kept working, silent and focused. Eli helped her string together old spoons like wind chimes, hanging them from the eaves above the porch. Every whisper of wind, every shadow flickering in the night, seemed to carry a voice. That night, sleep was a stranger to them all. Juny sat by the window, clutching Everett's revolver in her lap, her gaze fixed and unblinking, listening for the faintest sign of trouble. 2 nights later, the dog's low, steady barking sliced through the dark. No panic, just warning. Juny was already awake, moving through the shadows as if born for it. Her footsteps were soft as a cat's, shoulders tense and squared. She tapped once on Everett's door. That was all. He slipped out, dressed and armed, eyes scanning the dark. "West side," Juny whispered. "Someone's there." Eli slipped out behind them, lantern in hand but held low. Everett motioned toward the back door. They circled the barn in silence, shadows shifting beneath the moon. Then Juny saw it, a dark shape slipping between the fence posts, too tall for a stray dog, too quiet for an animal. Another shadow lurked behind it. 2, maybe 3 figures. Juny's eyes sharpened. "They're inside the fence," she whispered. Everett raised his rifle, tense as a coiled spring. "Go to the cellar. Wake Hester." Juny shook her head. "I stay." Everett's jaw tightened. "I didn't ask." "Neither did I," she replied, steady as stone. Then, near the barn, another shape moved, faint and flickering in the moonlight. Eli raised the lantern slightly higher. In the dim glow, a face appeared behind a stack of hay, scarred, unshaven, grinning with a gun in hand. "Drop it!" Everett shouted, voice echoing through the night. But the man was already ducking, already running. Darrow's men. That's what the quiet muttering was about. They'd been testing the boundaries of this forsaken place, and it could have gone even worse if Juny hadn't been ready for him. As the dust settled, Everett turned toward her, suspicion flickering in his eyes. "Someone tipped you off?" he said quietly. Juny's gaze didn't waver. She looked at Everett, then at Eli, then finally at the sheriff. "She did," she whispered. The sheriff raised a brow, waiting. Everett nodded slowly, voice low and steady. "That girl's the reason we're still breathing out here." The sheriff's face grew serious. "I'll send a deputy to scan the ridge. Might be more out there lurking in the shadows." With that, he rode off into the dusk. Everett turned back to Juny, voice barely above a whisper. "You said they're coming." She looked at him, her eyes dark and unyielding. "I've seen their kind before," she said softly. He studied her for a long moment before speaking, cautious. "How do you know?" Juny's gaze settled on the blood-stained ground near the barn, her voice almost a whisper. "Because they're the same sort that burned my home to the ground." 3 days drifted by in tense silence. No riders, no gunfire, no shadows slipping over the ridge. But Juny didn't let her guard down. At dawn, she was already up, checking traps, reinforcing the barn's door, her eyes scanning the treetops like she expected the woods to whisper secrets. Her expression was hard, unsoftened. Her focus razor-sharp, as if she was hunting something unseen. Everett noticed it. Eli saw it too. Even Hester, who'd barely uttered a kind word since Juny arrived, started leaving the back door unlocked at night, just in case Juny needed to slip away in the dark. Trust, slow as sap, was bleeding from old wood itself. Then, on the fourth evening, the visitor arrived. The sun was slipping behind the western ridge, casting long shadows across the land, when Everett spotted him, not sneaking, not circling, but riding straight down the trail as if he owned every inch of it. The man was tall, shoulders slouched but confident, like he carried a burden he refused to drop. His coat was worn black leather, dust clinging to the cuffs. His hat shaded his eyes, but the way he sat stiff and deliberate told of a man haunted long before his horse came to a halt near the porch. Juny stepped out the moment the hoofbeats slowed, barefoot as ever, her patched dress hanging loose. She looked like she had on the auction block, vulnerable yet unyielding. The rider saw her and let out a low, gravelly laugh. "Well, I'll be," he drawled. "Little June bug. Thought you were burned to ash with the rest of 'em." Everett tensed beside her, but Juny's gaze held steady. She didn't blink. "Figured you'd come sniffing around again," she said coldly. The man swung down from his saddle, boots hitting the dirt with a promise of trouble. "Always knew you were sharp," he said, voice rough. "That's what your daddy liked about you?" Everett's voice was low, warning. "You know this man?" Juny nodded slowly. "He knew my family," she said quietly. The man grinned, a crooked, dangerous smile. You could feel the heat of that moment crackle in the air, as if the very dust beneath their boots was holding its breath. Darrow lit the fuse with a slow, deliberate nod, and silence stretched between them like a taut wire ready to snap. Then, with a tilt of his head, he posed the question that hung heavy. How will this showdown end? Everett Langston didn't blink. He knew the stakes, knew the game. "You hand her over," Darrow said softly, voice like gravel, "or I'll come back with the boys and take her by force." Everett didn't flinch. The silence grew thicker, more dangerous. Then Juny spoke up first, her voice steady as a mountain peak. "I ain't going anywhere." Darrow's grin spread wide, like he'd been waiting for that very answer all along. "Good," he drawled, tipping his battered hat. "That's exactly what I wanted to hear." Without another word, he turned, mounted his horse with a fluid, predatory grace, and rode away, faster than a devil's whisper, leaving only the promise that he'd return. That night, the darkness settled heavy over the land, and sleep was a stranger to all. Hester sat stiffly in her rocking chair by the kitchen window, rifle across her lap, eyes scanning the shadows. Everett paced the creaking porch, every step echoing the tension in his chest. Eli, clutching a lantern and with the bell rope tied tight to his ankle, sat stiffly beside Juny, fists clenched like he could hold back the storm. "You knew him," Everett murmured, voice low and cautious. Juny nodded, her gaze distant. "He rode with my father once," she said softly. "Split after a fight over stolen horses. A month later, Darryl burned our place to the ground." Everett's jaw clenched. "Why you?" he asked, voice barely a whisper. "Because I said I'd kill him someday," she replied, her eyes steady as a frontier sunrise. Everett studied her long and hard. Maybe that day was finally coming. Juny didn't flinch. "I'm ready." Darryl returned at dusk, flanked by 5 riders cloaked in dust and menace. Faces hidden beneath broad hats, rifles strapped tight to their backs, they rode up with a slow, deliberate confidence. No longer hiding, no longer afraid. They stopped just beyond the Langston fence, where the grass was patchy and the wind carried the sharp tang of gunpowder. Everett stood on the porch, rifle in hand, muscles tense. Hester was behind the door, shotgun loaded and ready, her breath tight in her chest. Eli sat in the loft, a lantern in one hand, the bell rope tied to his ankle, prepared to signal if anyone crept from the north. Juny was near the corral, her stance still and eyes sharp, not yet holding a weapon, but ready to strike. Darrell dismounted, voice loud and mocking. "I knew you'd come," he called out, eyes narrowing as he looked at her. Juny didn't flinch. "I was counting on it," she said with a slow smirk. "Still full of fire, huh?" she challenged, stepping forward. "Leave now, or you'll regret setting foot on this land." Darrow's men chuckled darkly. One spat on the ground, another casually loosened his rifle, resting it over the saddle horn like a warning. "You think you can scare us?" Darrell sneered. "You're just a girl?" Juny's smile widened, sharp as a blade. A shot shattered the silence, a bullet kicking up dirt at his boots, sending a cloud of dust spiraling into the fading sunset. Another whistled past his ear, icy and close enough to feel the whisper of metal. Instinct took over. His hand released the grip on his gun, and he dropped it with a clatter, the sound swallowed by the chaos. His men hesitated, teeth clenched and muscles tense, reluctant to abandon their weapons. Growling under their breath, they too let go of their guns, surrendering to the overwhelming pressure. One of them made a desperate move to run. But Sheriff Dunn was already riding into the fray, his badge catching the last rays of sunlight, gleaming like a warning. With a swift motion, he closed the distance and tackled the fleeing man, his horse kicking up a spray of dust as he dismounted. "You brought law to a gunfight," Darrow spat, voice rough with contempt. Juny stepped forward, her eyes dark and steady. "No," she said softly. "I brought family." Her words cut through the gunpowder haze, more powerful than any bullet. By the time the last rider was bound and hauled into town, the moon had climbed high, casting silvery light over the scene. The stars blinked down, silent witnesses to the chaos and calm alike. The Langston house stood tall and unscathed. No broken boards, no lives lost to the violence. Inside, Hester poured tea with trembling hands, her cheeks flushed from the adrenaline, pressing a gentle kiss to Juny's hair before realization dawned. "I'm proud of you, girl," she whispered, voice thick with emotion. Eli's name was written in the dust on the table by a fingertip, a quiet testament to the boy's presence. Then, with a soft smile, Eli looked at her and said, "Juny." His voice was worn but steady, carrying the weight of unspoken promises. Juny froze, her breath catching, eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "Just once," she whispered in her mind. "Say it again, Eli." 2 days later, Sheriff Dunn returned, clutching papers that seemed to weigh heavy in his hand. "Don't know if you've thought about it," he said quietly to Everett. "But that girl's got no kin, no one to claim her." Everett looked toward the porch, where Juny sat mending Eli's shirt, the boy reading quietly beside her, the scene peaceful and normal. "I reckon that's not true," Everett replied, voice low. "Then it's just a matter of ink," Dunn said, signing the papers with a slow, deliberate motion.